All right, welcome to our second pilot, or perhaps our first official show, we're not sure yet, of Current Affairs Taiwan. I'm Donovan Smith.
And I'm Michael Turton. By ROC law, we have to inform you, please do not drink and drive.
At a Han Kuo-yu rally, of course.
There are elderly people there.
That's right. All right, well this time we are grape enhanced. Cheers. All right, so this week we had the Han rally.
Saturday we had the Han rally.
Yeah.
And everyone's talking about it. So how many people were there anyway?
Good question. Okay, so here are the numbers that are out there. The organizers, Han Kuo-yu got up on stage right when he kicked off his speech. He said 300 to 400,000. The rally organizers are claiming 400. The police say 55. The Taipei Times calls it tens of thousands. CNA calls it hundreds of thousands. My estimate is about 100,000. The KMT was initially was anticipating 100 to 150,000. And what's your take?
Hang on, I got some points I gotta give here.
Sure.
Alright, let's see. 1 pound of mozzarella, 3 pounds of salt. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Here we go. So, the police estimate is the one that I always go by. I found that many years in a blog, when I was writing the blog, I would track the police estimate, and it was very reliably 1/4 the size of the actual crowd. So whatever formula they're using reduces the crowd size, and we always felt that that was because the police wanted to deprecate the size of DPP crowds. So the police estimate was 55,000, so I'm thinking personally that means it's about 200,000 people were there that day.
My take, what's interesting is you use the police numbers.
Right.
Which I think now, I think they're less political than they used to be. And also, I'm not sure they would want necessarily to, even if they were still as pan-blue as they used to be, bring down or deprecate a Han rally.
Right.
But I still think they were lowballing the numbers. What I use as my estimate is if it's an important rally, the numbers will be increased, or the real numbers are about 1/3 to 1/4 of whatever the press is reporting, which is usually based on the organizers.
Right, right.
So organizers say 400,000. To me, that puts it sort of in the 100,000 range.
Yeah, that sounds a good estimate is 100 to 200,000.
Yes,
I would say.
Yeah, but either way, that was a big turnout, and it was better than what the KMT put up on their own website in anticipation. So I think that this was a big win for them.
It looks like a big win for them, and I've noted this. All the commentary among the foreign observers were Chris Horton was there, and Brian from New Bloom was there, and Tanner Greer, who runs Scholar Stage at blog, fantastic blog. Get it on your list.
Yeah, definitely.
They were all there. They were all remarking on the size of the crowd and also the age of the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people in the crowd were over 40. So, and Greer pointed out that, well, all three of them said everyone there was over 40. They talked to people there. They couldn't find any young people to talk to, and only the few that they talked to couldn't really say why they were there.
Yeah.
But
Grandma brought me.
Yeah.
They bought me an ice cream.
The ones that Greer interviewed said it's because other young people are stupid and don't understand politics.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at a block of people, as Greer points out in his comments on Facebook. You're looking at a block of people who vote.
Yes.
The over 40 group votes. And one thing that Greer said that the other two didn't was that people had told him if they don't have Han Kuo-yu to vote for, they're going to vote for Zhu Lirun, Eric Zhu, the former mayor of New Taipei City, and the presidential candidate in 2016 who lost to Tsai Ing-wen. I thought that, both of us thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I would have thought they would have gone for Terry Go over, timing over Zhu Lirun, but apparently not. Eric Chu it is. I thought that was interesting.
Guo Taiming's "Get Off My Lawn" candidacy is not exactly compelling. He's an uncharismatic, grumpy old man.
Yes. Yeah.
And he talks a lot.
Yeah, he's also thin-skinned. He's got some deficiencies as a candidate, except he does have a lot of money. But yeah, he's not I don't really see Terry go carrying it all the way to the finish line, because he can't really carry a positive message, which Han Kuo-yu definitely can, I think.
Right.
Now, however, you have... we'll get into that in a minute, I guess, because you've got an interesting prediction here, which jives with what I'm thinking as well. But in terms of Han's performance, I thought that it was very... his performance was very... It came across... he's got a charisma. He's got a very good way of communicating to people. He brings a hopeful, optimistic message, filled with hope for the future, love for the country. He brings out old traditional values. He, and so what he's doing is he's really bringing out all the hopes and dreams that we all wish and hope for the future. Now, he does a very, very good job of it. Now, his target demographic, if I can blather on a little bit here, as you know, the 40 to 60, 40 to 65,
yeah,
that demographic. You'll notice that there's a spike in pan-green supporters over that age group and under that age group. And this is particularly important because the people who are older than that remember the real harshness of martial law era, and people younger are what people call the naturally born independents.
Yeah, the natural I do. Yeah.
And so, but that middle demographic, they remember the softer tail end of martial law. When it was not quite as brutal or in your face as the earlier generation saw it. And also they saw the booming economy. And that's something that they remember very vividly and something they missed very dramatically. I mean, both of us arrived when the economy was booming, and it was something to behold. I mean, seriously. So, I mean, I personally get that, wishing the economy were like that again, except that not really sure how you deliver that outside of what's being done now, bringing the factories and so on and so forth back. We'll get into the economics a little bit later. But that go-go boom times, it's going to be hard to...
It's gone. It will never... You can't replicate it. The U.S. middle class is gone. The special U.S. support that the U.S. gave Taiwan, until 1989, one of Reagan's last acts was to take Taiwan off of the special tariff schedule, because it was treated as a developing nation. It had got special tariffs. Mm-hmm. The U.S. The pressure that the U.S. government put on firms to transfer their production out here, all these things, all the factors that made it possible for Taiwan to boom, and especially after 1989, when the Plaza Accords forced Taiwan to let the NT float. And then floated right up to 23. I don't know if you remember that, but briefly it was 23 to the dollar.
23, 24, yeah.
Yeah, and I was making a fortune. I was making like 7,000 US a month. In 1989, it was ridiculous. Teaching English in Taiwan. Yeah. So, anyway, we drifted far from the issue here, which is the age of the voters for Han. I think we should note these guys are old. And this is also Lai Chinda's demographic. Yes. The 40 to 60 group.
Now, by the way, when we're referring to these people as old, you can tell by looking at this video that neither of us are in that demographic. Correct. Both of us, we'll turn 30 soon.
This gray hair is a result of the fluorescent light.
Yes, that's right.
So, this demographic that is... And let's face it, you read between the lines of what people are saying in the media, and you're looking at a whole bunch of deep blue voters and longtime KMT supporters who are Taiwanese. A lot of them came up on their own. There were also groups bust up from Yunnan. So we didn't see a rally that represents a cross section of the nation.
No.
We saw a rally that represents a cross section of KMT voters.
I think a very specific one, and I do think that he gets a lot of people who didn't vote before, a lot of people who'd lost passion for politics, I think he's getting a lot of people who would be normally non-voters, actually. I think he's getting a lot of those. Tanner Greer's comments also, he noted that a lot of people had, personally gone through a lot of efforts up to get themselves up there on their own. And there was quotes, I think it was the CNA was talking about how, this one guy was talking about, he hasn't seen anything this great since, Chen Jingguo and Chiang Kai-shek, and so obviously
clearly an old mainlander.
Yes, you get that demographic because he's appealing to that demographic. Although Terry Go is kind of going for them as well.
Right.
But I think really this answers for me this answers the big question of whether or not Han Kuo-yu has a floor, and I do think he has a pretty solid floor.
He's got
for
a
now.
base. He's got a base. Yes.
And so people can always lose a base, but I do think that his base is pretty solid in that a lot is going to have to be brought to bear to tear that base down.
Yeah.
The question, though, and this is the hard part, and I'm going to kick it over to you in a second, because we were talking about this earlier, and I like the way you phrased it. But basically, breaking out of that base is what's going to be tough, because we don't know what that number is nationally. It appears to be 25, 26, 30%. If the other KMT candidates drop out and he becomes the candidate, maybe that rises to 40, 45. The question is that budgeable? Can he get it higher? And number two is, really, what is that floor? What is that base? My suspicion is it's somewhere between like 25 and 30% that are pretty hardcore. Maybe 20.
Yeah.
20 to 30% that are pretty hardcore.
That's the feel I'm getting on it too.
Maybe 20. Let's call it 20. For 15 to 20 for him, plus a bunch for the KMT, which brings him up to 35, say. 35, 40, something like that. Because I think the KMT's maybe got 30 to 35 as a floor just for the party. And possibly as high as 40. Probably not. I think we saw Julila in the last election pretty much testing the very bottom limit on that. So let's call it, say, just for argument's sake, 30%, but he's also attracting some people who don't normally vote. So if he wins the primary, I see a floor of something along the lines of 35%.
Right.
Now, in a head-to-head against Taiwan, that's not enough. That's just not going to carry him unless he can expand from his base into the independents.
No.
And you're going to explain in a second why neither of us think this is going to happen. But the part where this gets messy mathematically is if Ke enters the race, because then a base of 30 to 35% looks formidable.
Yeah.
But as far as their ability to move outside of the base,
well, a lot of observers on Twitter and on Facebook, including Tanner Greer, were saying, "Whoa, Han's going to be tough to beat." And to me, I listened to what he said, and I heard a man who lost the election today. So my feeling is that Han has already peaked. The cold hard fact is that polls are already out there showing Tsai a point or two or even with him. And today and yesterday he made some comments about this election is the election that we have to save the ROC.
Yep.
And this is the same rhetoric that completely failed candidate Hong Xiu-zu was married to in the 2016 election. At heart, Han is an unreconstructed, far-right mainlander. And that is going to come out in the election. And his position on the ROC and on China and all these things is non-mainstream. The 1992 consensus is overwhelmingly unpopular in Taiwan. What is that? One country, two systems, unpopular since the late 1990s. And the idea of saving the ROC, that is a position that is not going to register with most voters in Taiwan. And Han has not demonstrated that he's going to create economic miracles or any of the other things that voters are looking for. There's some rhetoric about how he's already doing that in Kaohsiung, which is, of course, complete nonsense. And when you ask Han voters, can you concretely say what he's done in Kaohsiung? No one can give a single example.
One, which actually Tanner Greer brought up, is he has revived spirits in Kaohsiung.
That's what people say.
Yeah.
But but concrete things all the things he talks about bringing in Disney, and Terry Guo was talking about relocating factories. These things haven't actually occurred, and he keeps making noise about this. And this, I think, is his other great flaw. In addition to holding a whole series of non-mainstream positions about Taiwan's status and the ROC status and Taiwan's relationship with China, he talks too much. He's a talker, and he's constantly offering things and making noise, and sooner or later, these things will come back to bury him. So my attitude is, when I read what he said, I thought, here's a man who's already lost the election because he's identified himself with positions that are not mainstream at all.
I wouldn't go so far as to say he lost the election, but I completely agree with the main thrust of what you're saying there, is that he's essentially sinking himself, he's essentially locking himself into a minority position, which is not going to expand beyond 50%. It just can't.
No, there's no way.
Now, he has some advantages over Han Kuo-yu.
He's a man.
Yeah, I was going to say he's testicularly enhanced.
He's a man, and also he's a man.
He's more charismatic, just as a human.
Really charismatic, yeah.
I mean, he comes across as very sincere. He comes across as likable. He comes across as kind of your down on his luck, but full of hope guy down the block. So I do think that he'll do far better than, and he already has, than Han Kuo-yu. I don't think Han Kuo-yu would have won Kaohsiung mayorship. But everything you just said is absolutely correct. I mean, the thing is that the positions he's taken...
Can I record that? You just said I was absolutely correct.
Yeah, I say that all the time.
We're recording this right now. I'm going to savor this comment for years.
The only way I see him winning is if the vote is seriously split come the general election.
Yeah.
That's how he takes it.
If there's a third candidate.
Yeah, and he might take a little bit more from the green side than the blue side. There's also the possibility that William Lai Ching-te could run as an independent, or go timing, Terry Go, or...
That would be awesome.
That would take away from...
It would be super.
I mean, the election's already out there as it is, yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, the 92 consensus is not terribly popular. People might swallow that because they did survive it from Ionia.
Right.
So, but one country, two systems, Han very intelligently came out against it. But again, by and large, yeah, his actual positions, when you stop and look at them outside of the habal way of communicating, it's basically Han Kuo-yu rewarmed for this election.
Han's advantage is this crossover appeal. He is a mainlander who talks like a Taiwanese gangster wannabe.
Yes, we both picked up on exactly the same
That's exactly what he is.
Yeah.
I'm really actually surprised he doesn't wear big flowery shirts, right? And black shoes and drive a Zafira to rallies.
No.
That's the kind of man he is. He has absolutely mastered that idiom.
Yeah.
And that has deep appeal for that 40-plus age group.
Yeah.
But
he communicates, very Taiwanese style.
Yeah. He knows how to do that. He's been working with the Yunlin factions for years in the vegetable markets. That's what the guy in the CNA thing said, right? He knew Han from the vegetable marketing
era. Yeah.
So I'm thinking the rest of the world is terrified of Han. I'm thinking Han sank himself today.
Yeah, if it's a straight up race between him and the DPP, I think he loses.
Yes.
I think he's got an uphill battle even in a three-way race, but I do think he's got at least 30-35% for now, unless what you said before about him just talking sinks him.
Yeah.
But it hasn't so far.
Not completely.
Not completely.
Because he did have that gaffe with the Filipina.
Yes.
Remember that? There's been a couple of them.
He didn't lose much of his base.
No.
His demo
thinks Filipinas are...
Exactly. Yeah. So as far as his demo and as far as the people who are going to vote for him in the first place, almost all of his gaffes, he's not losing his voters. He's not losing his base, I don't think. So, yeah.
I brought my dog today.
Yes.
Taiwan Go.
Yes. I hope you got the pun on that.
I got
All
it.
right, should we move on? Do we have
Lee and Bolton.
Lee and Bolton?
You were telling me all about this. Who was at the meeting last week? John Bolton and David Lee met in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Allegedly the first meeting. Everyone said it was the first meeting in 40 years between national
The heads of
security.
the NSAs, or the equivalent thereof. Yeah.
That's actually not true, but it was said. So it was widely perceived as a very serious and important event. But who else was there?
This is what's been is that apparently, okay, it's not 100. They're not exactly coming out and confirming these reports, but they're not denying them either. It was the representative from Nauru and another one from the region, Oceania somewhere, Palau I think was the other one, and that was in the meeting. And so that's a very interesting context for the meeting.
Yeah.
So obviously it's about China moving. The worries about China moving out of the first island chain, which is the defense perimeter that basically the U.S. has maintained with allies in Japan, the Philippines, that kind of create a kind of barrier for the Chinese Navy to move out. The South China Sea, they can kind of move around, but there have been concerns. Now, Vanuatu, last year there was this whole big talk about China was buying a base there or a port there for them to be able to put their navy there. They denied it up and down. But so there's this meeting is going on at right around the same time. Morrison was elected the PM in Australia, and he and what's his first overseas trip? Oh, he wasn't elected. His party was, and you know how parliamentary systems work. Anyway, so his party picked him. Yeah. Anyway, he there was an election, and he's now the prime minister again. So anyway, so I'm Canadian. Americans don't get this. Anyway, so anyway, so his first trip is to the Solomon Islands, which has been on the fence on whether or not they're going to recognize China or continue to recognize Taiwan. So we've got, for at least publicly the first time since diplomatic relations were tied, we've got the head of the NSA meeting the Taiwan equivalent with representatives of 2 Oceania states in Washington, D.C. We've got the newly chosen prime minister in Australia right after the election going on his first overseas trip to the Solomon Islands. And right about the same time, right on the front page of the People's Daily, Xi Jinping meeting with the Prime Minister of Vanuatu and talking about how important their relations are. And now keep in mind that Vanuatu is a country with less people than a medium-sized apartment block in Shanghai. So that was an awful lot of coverage for an awfully small country coming out of China. So this is all happening in a few days there, and so I think there's a lot going on here. The analogy I used on Taiwan This Week, on ICRT's Taiwan This Week, was, you remember the Great Game in Central Asia?
Yeah.
It's almost kind of like that,
The
a
same
redux
thing.
version, but it's
Right.
these little tiny countries in the Pacific.
Yeah.
But if China does get a base there, that means that they can start operating outside of the first island chain. And so I could see why Bolton and the Australians might be concerned about this. This is also considered by the Australians kind of their backyard. So
Yeah.
that was me paying attention to the news last week. I read the occasional bit of news from time to time. Did you know that?
Ah.
Yeah.
So tell me about the economy then. What's going on with these factories I'm hearing are moving from Taiwan or China back to Taiwan?
Well, okay, yeah. So that the latest announcements bring up the pledged amounts of investments coming back up to 330 billion NT, which is just over 10 billion US. That's pledged, which never actually happens in the real world. But it's still
a billion of that.
right. But it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
I do think it's more than $1 billion, but it's not going to be 10 billion. You know,
Well,
it's
we're also seeing. I was hearing yesterday from a friend about how some of the internet gaming companies are doing work here rather than in China, because obviously you can't do creative work in China like you can. It's closed.
yeah.
So here they're relocating staff here because not only can they work freely, but they have a Chinese test market.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we're going to see a lot more of that as time goes by, as people start treating Taiwan as an alternative to China and locating here.
Yeah.
I'm kind of hoping the foreign media will start moving here as well. There's been some of that already.
Yeah, reporters.
Oh, that's right. The the Reporters Group
Without Borders.
Yeah, Reporters Without Borders.
They set up their headquarters here for East Asia.
I think we're going to see more of that.
I hope so. Yeah. And it might mean that the international media, though, they might actually have to learn how to separate us from Thailand, though. That you know, and so we'll have to coach them on the basics. Since 1949.
Yeah. Renegade province.
Yeah. Oh God. Anyway. Actually, just as a total side note, I do want to get back to some of the economy stuff in a second because I'm really tedious and boring.
Okay.
But you found a reference to somebody found, I can't remember which, on your blog about the only time that you're aware of where China used renegade province, and it was not in reference to Taiwan.
That was the first
time.
Learned
this from you.
In 1979, and then, renegade province was actually the northern province, the northern areas of Vietnam. That's how it was referred to especially among South Chinese.
Yeah.
So the Lee Hui was actually, I think, the one who applied it to Taiwan.
Okay.
Although it turns up later in the 80s, applied to Taiwan in the New York Times, as I recall.
Yeah.
But Lee Hui, I think, was the one who actually made it popular. Sorry. We actually should not be drinking wine while doing this, but I think it was Lee Hui. But I remember locating some stories from the 80s that used it with reference to Taiwan. But originally, it didn't refer to Taiwan; it referred to the northern areas of Vietnam.
Yeah.
Which a lot of Chinese probably still see as theirs, and which I'm sure someday there's going to be some noises out of the official, the Chinese officials about how maybe we should get back northern Vietnam.
Yep, and Okinawa, and Mongolia,
and Korea.
And Korea.
Remember, in the first ROC map issued in 1916, Taiwan and Korea are both identified as vassal states under Japanese control, as former vassals under Japanese control.
Yeah.
So that residuum of expansionism is still there in the Han soul somewhere.
Yeah, it's very much so. I remember reading, similarly, about how there were maps in circulation in the 1980s in China that showed Vietnam and parts of Southeast Asia actually as Chinese territory.
Yeah. And there's that whole maps of national humiliation thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, we should get back to the
economics.
Primary.
Yeah, sorry.
You want to talk about
I'm a good nerd. I'm going to nerd out here.
Yeah.
So, yes, you know, I do that. But no, I mean, recently shipping has been a little bit down. Hiring's been a little bit down. Economic activity's been a little bit down. But because of the tariff war going on, but the interesting thing is there was a quote, it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where there was a quote about a business that was leaving China. And the quote from the person, I forget who, where the company was from, but basically the quote was flat out, basically this person said, Trump's tariff war is just an excuse. We've been wanting to leave for quite a while anyway.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is it's a repressive system there. The laws there have become much more restrictive in hiring and firing practices. The salaries have gone way up. And they have huge staff turnover, which if you, as an employer, I know, if you want to if you hire somebody, train them, and then you lose them in a year and then have to retrain somebody else, it's hugely costly and time expensive and a major hassle.
The CCP subsidies and benefits are all gone.
Yeah.
They used to hand those out in the 90s to Taiwan firm, but early in the early 2000s, those started to disappear.
Yeah. So a lot of the incentives for the companies to stay. So you have companies like Baozhong, which makes all those shoes.
Right.
And apparently the last I saw, now their production is about 14% in China, whereas a decade ago it was basically all in China. They had over 1 million employees in Zhongshan. But they moved out, and they moved out over the last 10, 15 years. And so this tariff thing is not really a major impact for them, because that 14% basically is more or less for the Chinese internal market.
Right.
So a lot of these companies, they were already looking at moving out, and the tariff war has sped it up. So what I think we're going to start seeing later in the year, as a lot of these companies, some of the more complicated products like cell phones and things like that have long supply chains, it's much harder to ship those out, but we're going to see a lot more items that are simpler or that are manufactured by one company, mostly in-house, are already moving out. They're already moving back to Taiwan, or a lot of US companies are shifting manufacturing outside of China. And a lot of that is coming back to Taiwan because there's a very educated, stable, much more loyal workforce here. There are problems with finding available land, which is a topic for another show. Registering factories here. Anyway, that's a whole long issue. But I do think that we're going to start to see an economic pickup later in this year, regardless of what happens
That will help
in the tariff war.
That will help Thai.
If the tariff war is actually lifted later in the year, but the manufacturing's already moved back, because I think a lot of them that do come back are going to stay, because I don't think that they want to risk being back in China again.
No.
So that's where I'm going with. And already, for the first time since the early 2000s, people's incomes have slowly, but have started to rise again recently. And the economy has been doing, for a fairly developed economy, actually pretty good. But unfortunately for the average person on the street, yes, incomes have been rising, but kind of slowly. And yes, the economy is improving, and some of it's reaching people, but not quite as a flood, and definitely not of the degree that, say, Han Kuo-yu or Terry Go is pitching.
Right.
So whether it's going to help Taiwan, I don't know, because unfortunately right now there does seem to be a lot of unrealistic hopes and expectations in the air. But,
yep, and that's what Lai Chinda is taking advantage of in the DPP primary.
yeah, that's the next topic.
Frozen Garlic had a great post echoing things that I've been saying for years about the generational splits in the independence movement, and which we talked about last week, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Lai is taking advantage of this. His support comes from older, less educated people. And I think, for me, like I said last week, the issue is basically sexism. And I think Tanner Greer's comments on Facebook about the Han Kuo-yu rally, where you see two versions of Tsai. First, Tsai is presented as the cold, unfeeling, distant, out of touch. Mm-hmm. And the other one is the administration is confused and it doesn't know what's going on and blah, blah, blah. These are basically two sexist tropes. In the first trope, Tsai is the frigid bitch. Mm-hmm. In the second trope, Tsai is a ditz. Mm-hmm. And at heart, I'm just going to keep saying it. The heart, the real issue is that Tsai Ing-wen does not have a penis. And that is why...
no, the politically correct term is she is testicularly challenged.
Oh, testicularly challenged. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
And so much of that, you look at these old guys who keep founding new groups to oppose her, and what you're really seeing is a lot of older males who don't like having a woman ruling over them and running the party. And it's not just Tsai, she's also surrounded by women who operate many of the party groups and departments. So this has been a problem for a lot of older men, and not just Taiwanese men. I've heard remarks from foreigners as well. Older foreigners, not younger ones. For example, my age, 23. And I think what Lai's challenge actually has shown me that he's not ready to be the president. And I think other people are going to be perceiving this as well. Lai is showing that he's not prepared to put the party and the nation ahead of himself. Mm-hmm. You look at someone who's the opposite of Lai Chinda, who gets things done and who's competent and who loves Taiwan and who's spent a career putting the party and the nation ahead of himself. Someone like Su Zhensang. Mm-hmm. And you see someone who would make a fantastic president, actually. It really makes me sad that he was never president. But Lai Chinda is not in that He's a jumped up. He's not in that league. He's a jumped up city mayor with no foreign policy experience. And it was ironic this week, the reports saying, Lai extols his experience in his run for the presidency. So, the best case scenario is that the DPP gets through this, Tsai wins, Lai and Tsai put on a show of healing, they run together with Lai as vice president, and with Tsai as the adopted, anointed one. But I just don't see that. I don't see Lai accepting that.
I think you probably read the piece that I wrote about the DPP infighting.
Yeah.
And this has turned into kind of and this is very damaging, I think, to the DPP internally.
Yeah, for sure.
Very damaging, because on Tsai's side, she was basically effectively blindsided by Lai coming into the primary.
Right.
Traditionally, partly because he flat out said when he was the premier that he would not challenge her in 2020.
That's why she put him there.
Right.
Right. You don't make a man a challenger that way.
Right. So, because that's a nice jump off point to run for the presidency. That or Taipei mayor, which is not her, she can't really appoint the Taipei mayor anymore. Once upon a time you could, but anyway. Anyway, we're not going to nerd out here on that history. So, but traditionally, there are exceptions, but it's pretty unusual for somebody to challenge a sitting incumbent. And when somebody does, what it usually means is that they have some grievances they want aired. They have, meetings, they negotiate and harmonize.
Right.
We're struggling with the English here, but you know what I mean in Chinese, right? But they work it out. I guess that's the best way to say it in English.
Right.
Is they get everybody, they sit them down, they work it out, and those grievances come out, and then whoever is the incumbent goes, okay, I'm listening to you, sure. And then they do some things to mollify the challenger, and then it all goes away. That's generally how it works. And when it's not, it's usually a serious insurrection. And so this is either a serious insurrection, or this is Lai Ching-te's ego going nuts.
I'm going with B on that. Well, A and B together, right?
Yeah. I feel
it's
like it's a combination of the two. Yeah.
I'm shocked that so many foreign observers say, "Oh, it should be Lai. Tsai's failed," and I'm like, "Where have you been for the last 4 years?"
Well, I'm not a big fan of a lot of her domestic.
Right.
She screwed up a lot of things domestically, and the average voter here in Taiwan doesn't really care about her foreign policy achievements. So there's definitely an argument, I think, to be made on the merits of the Tsai presidency in terms of domestic internal policies. There have been some things that I thought were very, very well handled, and that tied in very much with the original mission of the party.
Right.
And where they've fallen flat. And this is I think this is an institutional flaw in the party itself. Did you read my piece on marriage equality?
No, I haven't.
Okay. This is basically, I basically ripped the DPP a new one on this one. It was, because the way that they handled the marriage equality issue, we're kind of veering off script here, but it shows one of the structural flaws in the DPP. And the KMT has a mirror structural flaw. But the DPP was founded fundamentally, its core purpose right from the beginning was to defeat the KMT and end one-party rule.
Right. And
now that's kind of transmogrified into removing authoritarian imagery and continuing to defeat the KMT. And and then in the early 90s, when they got rid of some of the early Danwai Waisenren, the other democracy supporters who were not Taiwanese, they added on what they called then Taiwanese independence, or a greater emphasis on the sovereignty of Taiwan and the Taiwanese people as a nation separate from China. Right. So these are basically the pillars and the poles of the DPP. This is what the DPP is fundamentally about. And so I think, and so in that article, what I talked about was how the things that the Tsai administration has done well. They were well thought out, very well, that were done well and executed. For example, transitional justice,
yes,
or dealing with the pensions.
Sure.
Now, you can argue whether or not these were fundamentally a good or a bad policies, but they were handled carefully. They were well thought out. They brought in a lot of input from a lot of people,
yes,
and then they were executed carefully and well planned. But because these are the unifying poles of the party, those two things, defeating the KMT and removing authoritarianism and authoritarian symbology and symbols, and greater sovereignty for Taiwan, obviously also within the foreign affairs realm, Tsai Ing-wen, that's her background. She's been particularly strong and very consistent, again, within the DPP line of the Huadu side of the party. But if you look at where the DPP government here and the Tsai administration has fallen flat on their face, it's on areas that are not in those traditional areas. Marriage equality.
That was
a disaster from one end to the other. And that was what the article was fundamentally about. But this is one of the reasons I pointed out.
Right.
The labor law. They flip-flopped back and forth. Because the DPP is not a left-wing party, it's not a right-wing party. And so there's certain issues that the DPP can't handle well internally because they're not structured to.
Right.
These are not topics, and this is why I think the DPP is ripe for breaking apart over the next few years, at least with some rebellion or people leaving, like which happened to the KMT.
Well, actually, that's what we're looking at right now with the Lai Chinda thing.
Yes.
That generation is saying, we don't want to vote for this party anymore.
Right.
It's not radical enough.
Right.
Give us independence now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, there is that. And so there are people who, where are we going with this?
we wandered off down this track here, but let's come back to Lai. This generational thing.
Oh, I remember where we're going.
Okay, go ahead. Well, anyway, we were talking before this about how Lai actually holds the basic DPP positions on Taiwan's sovereignty and its status and all those things. He's not fundamentally at odds with Taiwan.
No, and he's flat out said Taiwan is an independent country with the name Republic of China, which is exactly the official DPP line and which is exactly Tsai Ing-wen's line.
So what you're actually looking at when you listen to Lai Chinda's supporters, when you listen to the Lai supporters, they're projecting on
their hopes and dreams.
Yes. Lai is going to carry us to independence because Tsai Ing-wen hasn't. And what's going to happen is Lai is going to disappoint them in the same way that Tsai Ing-wen does, because he has to. He's constrained by the same things that constrain Tsai Ing-wen.
Yeah.
The Constitution, the external political environment, etc., etc., etc. So, and the problem is that none of them will face this, that we are all going to die and not see an independent Taiwan. That's just the way the world works.
Taiwan is an independent nation under the name the Republic of China.
Taiwan has never been part of China. Read it. It's right here.
But yeah, so here's where we're starting with this. Is the Tsai was completely blindsided by this primary challenge
because she didn't have this.
I know.
If she had the crystal ball, she would have seen it. Anyway, go ahead.
So, and the reason that this is important from the perspective of her supporters is here's historically the way it works. Presidents at around this time, this is true under Ma, this is true under Chen Shui-bian, their poll ratings were really low right about this point in the presidency.
Yes.
Because they were concentrating on doing the job of being the president, not campaigning. And then what happens is, as you start to approach in the months, the half year, maybe a little more, that you in the run up into the general election for the presidency, that's when they go out and they start campaigning. They start passing laws which are popular and people vote getting friendly.
Yeah.
And then they remind everybody why they were elected.
Yep.
Tsai hadn't even begun this, and then all of a sudden she's challenged right in her backyard.
Yeah.
So she had been devoting all of her energy to being the president, and not being popular. And because the DPP has a primary mechanism where it's decided entirely on public opinion polling, she was left hugely vulnerable. And so this attack by Lai basically hit her at what was a weak point, using a structural weakness within the way that the primary is structured within the DPP.
Yeah. It's not her who's manipulating this, it's Lai.
But in defense of the Lai people, is that then, because generally Taiwan can't really come out and say, I'm unpopular because of cyclical reasons.
Yeah.
You know, she can't exactly come out and say the truth.
She's so classy, she never says anything. Yeah. She's so great. She's just going to let this blow by,
Yeah.
and then she'll start campaigning. And the polls are already showing peaking. Lai's peaking, Han is peaking. Tsai will start talking.
And she's
by
been
August,
coming up
all
in the
this
polls.
will be gone.
By August, she may have already lost.
That's true.
Because the DPP primary is going to be held now. The decision is between June 10th and June 14th.
Yeah.
So she's essentially got a week and a half to 2 weeks to win back the public. And from the Lai supporter side, they are right that the DPP brass and Tsai supporters have been rigging the system, because the primary was supposed to happen several months ago.
Yes.
So this is very damaging, I think, internally to the party, precisely because essentially Lai betrayed Tsai. Tsai and her team have been rigging the system against Lai. This is bloody internal warfare, and what the worry here is for DPP supporters and for the DPP going into the general election is that this is going to split the party going into it. Now, Lai apparently has come out and said that whoever wins, he'll continue to support the party. He won't leave and run as an independent, but then again, he said he would not run against against Tsai.
Exactly.
So, you know.
And the damage that he's done isn't going to go away.
No, and what this means is that there may be a good chunk of DPP voters who may stay home
For during the election.
or a certain percentage of them may come out behind yet another candidate.
Just like we saw in the Kaohsiung election. That could be extrapolated to the whole nation.
Yeah. So
Could be very grim.
it could be very grim. And so really but if Lai does win the primary, this creates a really tough situation for the DPP, because then you have the presidential nominee of the party who's different and may actually have to run in part against the current DPP administration, because you can almost certainly bet that communications are not going to be good between the presidential office
And its candidate.
and the candidate.
Yeah.
So what this means is that if Lai wins the primary, it's going to be Lai to a certain degree. He may end up at certain points having to run against his own party. And that's going to create a very awkward situation.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm not 100% sure that we can rule Han Kuo-yu winning this if there's a three-way race, just simply because the DPP,
If it's Lai, Han, and Kuo, it's going to be really
it's
tough.
going to be a tough one.
Yeah.
We don't know who's going to win that.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. So if it's a three-way election, it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be really tough.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all for tonight. And I hope to see all of you next week when we are even a little more professional. Thank you for watching.